Hello, everyone. Welcome to another AWS Cloud Computing session. Today, we're going to be going over AWS Startups. So, let me share my screen and then we can get started. Okay, so welcome to Startups. We're going to start off with talking about how to develop an idea. So, a founder's first goal is to create a product that solves a conflict for customers. And there are certain questions that founders should ask themselves when they're coming up with a specific idea. So, the few questions we have are stated below. Who is the product for? Why is the product needed? What problem does it actually solve? Is this important enough to the point where people will purchase it? And is there an actual need for this product? And a quote from a famous Silicon Valley entrepreneur, Steve Blank, says, more startups fail from a lack of customers than from a failure of product development. So always make sure if you're starting a startup that you have a product that is worthy of a lot of customers being able to buy it. Now talking about finding a co-founder. So statistically speaking, the most successful startups have a founder and a co-founder. Despite this, most failures in startups are caused by conflicts between the two founders. So make sure to be truthful about your strengths and weaknesses in order to find a co founder that complements your specific skills. Tips for hiring is don't give everybody a high title, don't follow major companies' recruiting techniques. Hire those who actually have faith in your company and are passionate about the company, and have trial periods for potential employees. Understanding equity and compensation models. So, do not leave anything out of the discussion when it comes to equity distributors amongst co founders. Unequal split of equity and profit can, of course, lead to distrust, and giving an even share to each co founder helps the company come first. And make sure you have equity discussions early so that lawyers and shareholders don't need to be involved. Now we're going to be debunking a few myths about startups. So, renting an office is unnecessary when starting off. You can work in a garage, a library, coffee shop, or spare bedroom. By the way, these aren't the myths, these are the opposite. If a formal work setting is required, one can visit AWS Lost to be in the proximity of technical experts. You can keep an eye on monthly expenses, such as rent and payroll. You should measure the rate at which your profit grows, and you should also measure the cost of acquiring new customers. And also make sure to follow set timetables in order to keep on pace with your goals. Now, for customer discovery. So, validate your idea by discussing your product with people you know and people you trust. This group can include friends, family, and also even potential customers. Customer discovery is evaluating, correcting, and also refining your idea, and this requires a repetitive cycle. The cycle includes building, learning, testing, and evaluating. The more customer feedback that you receive puts you at a greater advantage. And this is because you can ultimately narrow your product down to what customers crave. And as we talked about before, that's extremely important because most startups fail from um, having no customers rather than product development. So, as we've covered in all of the previous live streams, every single video that's going to be on this slideshow is extra. We're not going to go over it in the actual live stream, but all the videos are going to be posted in the description of the live stream once it's ended. So, if you'd like to learn more about certain topics that are covered, you can watch these videos and they'll be there whenever you need them to be. All right, now we're on day two, and we're going to start off day two by talking about how to find and listen to customers. So, interviews with customers are ultimately the best way to receive their feedback. because you can help because you can ultimately figure out what matters to them by asking them certain questions. Every idea starts with finding a new way to please your customers. And the goal is to constantly update and keep up with the customer's needs so that your business and your product does not become outdated at all. Determine whether your services are going to be used by customers or other businesses. And there are a few tips that we have here for when you are going to be communicating with your customers. So try to stay away from vague inquiries and try to avoid yes or no questions. Make sure to inquire fundamental questions which are designed in order to evince insight. So general open-ended questions are more beneficial because you can get the most information out of them. And end your conversations by asking your customer who else to talk to. So the process never ends and that you can ultimately get the most knowledge out of it. Customer validation and understanding your market. So, customer validation, the definition is actually finding and comprehending your customer's market. Just having enthusiasm doesn't necessarily mean that you have a large market, and you have to be able to figure that out for yourself. There are 5 questions here that you can ask. So, is it large enough to support your business? How many people are actually going to become customers and purchase your product? Is the market new or is it already existing? If you have online links, try to see your CTR rate or your click through rate and create sign up pages for your product's launch so people can get early access. And once again, you can learn more from your customers. Consider how much money it's going to take to reach your markets. And something to note here is that software only products cost much less as compared to hardware only products. Also, consider implementation roadblocks. So, this is following certain rules for this specific industry which you're a part of. Also, know your competition. This is important because you can learn from their mistakes, and that will help to set you apart to your customers. Now we're going to be talking about building a prototype. So, I'm sure all of you know what a prototype is, but in case you don't, it's something that's created in order to see whether or not a certain product will succeed after launch. In other words, it's like a blueprint on the actual product. So when you're making your prototype, you want to focus on learning about your product rather than getting into all the meat and potatoes of it, like coding and adding to it. And a prototype has to be added so that the product can be best suited for the customer's needs. And it's basically like a trial. Don't hurry the process of making a product prototype. This is where you need to take your time and check frequently to make sure the prototype follows your goal. Now introducing the concept of an MVP. So an MVP is also known as a minimal viable product, and it's typically the first product that a company makes. It's thought of as the simplest edition of a product that still proves a hypothesis, and it has as little features as possible that are required to support the actual key function of it. An MVP is the first product to be ready for the consumer market. So it's different than a prototype because this is the first product that's actually ready for the consumer market or to buy. An MVP tests a hypothesis and is a bare bones structure of what the idea was meant to be. And as you can see here, it does have a few similarities to a prototype. And one of the big ones is that an MVP isn't going to be ideal. It's not going to cover every single thing. And it prioritizes functionality over aesthetics. So the picture over here shows what we just talked about. So minimal viable product. Minimum is the most rudimentary bare bones foundation of the solution as possible. Viable means that it's sufficient enough for early adopters. And then lastly, product means that it's something tangible customers can actually touch and feel and use. Now we're going to be talking about how to actually develop an MVP. So building an MVP has multiple repetitive cycles and it goes through certain processes like designing, building, deploying, and measuring. With each addition of new processes, the MVP becomes steadily better, and it allows for quick and responsive feedback from users. Make sure to keep the MVP simple. And we have a quote over here from an internet entrepreneur named Reid Hoffman, who's in the picture on the right, which says, "If you aren't embarrassed by the first version of your product, you shipped too late." Again, you know, prioritizing functionality over aesthetics, and being a bare bones slash blueprint version of what the product needs to be. And also add features after your hypothesis has been verified. Another video that's going to be in the description of the live stream.
So I'm just going to reintroduce myself just.
All right, now on day 3, we're going to start by talking about sprints. So sprints are processes that are often used when developing software. They have a certain amount of time where predetermined work is actually completed, and they also have a fixed theme and objective. They have a deliverable function and should last around 1 to 2 weeks. The shorter the sprint, the better, and this is because your goals are not going to change. So you can save customer feedback for the next sprint, and you want to have prioritization here because you want to be able to focus on your primary business functions. Focus on high effect and quick to build work. You have the capacity to build a great product, so make sure it's the right one. And that's a senior software developer at AWS, Nikki Stone's quote. The recommendations after sprints are continuous implementation and constant delivery. Now talking about potential pitfalls. So this is an anti-pattern, um, which is a universal response to a conflict which is unproductive. Being prepared for this anti-pattern is going to help prevent whenever they undoubtedly show up. And technical debt gatherers when engineers rush through work instead of focusing on quality and proper implementation. Technical debt doesn't necessarily come from laziness, but it could come from a strategic decision which is used to swiftly eradicate a conflict. Not generalizing code can lead to extra coding work and refactoring. Undifferentiated heavy lifting is also a potential pitfall. And customers want the product and don't mind you borrowing from existing resources, so don't be scared of doing that too much. Now talking about the fundamentals of actually working with AWS. So there are two types of decisions, and this is a part of the fundamentals. So the one-door decision and the two-door decisions. So these don't happen equally. The two-door decisions are the most common and occur the majority of the time. One-door decisions should be thought through thoroughly, and security decisions are one-door decisions and usually can't be remade. When making these type of security decisions, you should consider three things. So one is like um, considering both their and AWS's responsibilities in general, considering who gets access to certain objects amongst the workforce, and considering how much access do the actual users and the customers receive. So startups on AWS receive enterprise level security, and AWS itself offers SSL and DDoS protection. SSL stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and standard security technology for creating a protected link between a web server and a browser. DDoS stands for Distributed Denial of Service, and this is a cyber attack that interferes with the services of the host. So startups have to know the relation of their product with the government, healthcare, and more in order to proceed. And they also have to be able to follow any rules and regulations within the field. Points of integration also have to be considered as developers are not going to be able to understand a product without proper documentation of it. An API is an application programming interface, and it's a set of guidelines that are made to connect with another person's software. It's important here to select the correct database for the type of data that you specifically need to store. And as you can see, there's a summary of a one-way door and a two-way door in the picture. So for a one-way door, once you installed it, there's no way back, and you need to think about it. And senior management is usually involved in these situations. In two-way door, there is a way back, and you want to let the people in the field solve it as soon as possible. Now talking about introduction to architecture with AWS. So it's a monolithic architecture, which is an architecture that combines all the working parts of an application, such as data input, output, processing, air handling, and more all together into a singular program. It allows for rapid development as you do not need to make the processes well ahead of time, and a well-designed monolith can be scaled horizontally and then broken apart upon a later date. Architecture applications such as Amazon Elastic Beanstalk are going to automate all the processes for you, and they're also much simpler to work and handle. Microservices are independent services that each perform their own functions, and microservices work together as a single product, but if one microservice goes down, the others are unaffected. Microservices are good for scaling large systems, but they usually take longer to build, and because of that, you want to optimize data architecture for speed. Serverless is a type of architecture where servers that code is running on do not need to be actually set up by the user, and this grants more time to focus on the code. This automatically scales for the user to avoid the user from having to predict customer traffic. So again, making with AWS making it as convenient as possible for the startup owner. Now I'm talking about legal needs and assessing them. So a common legal decision that a business makes is whether or not it becomes a legal entity. And this is basically when a company gains legal rights on applications such as tax filings. There are multiple types of legal entities, such as limited liability. You might be asking what actually is limited liability, and it's the following. So, first, it's the detachment of personal resources from business resources. It prevents business owners' responsibility and losses and legal liability. And it exists to help business owners take risks without the fear of legal action or liability. However, it's not perfect and it shouldn't be considered as a get out of jail free card. Now, what are unincorporated entities? So these are businesses that do not have the limited liability and are known as unincorporated entities. Excuse me. There are two types, which is sole proprietorship and general partnerships. And sole proprietorship is owned by business and managed by one person. On the other hand, a general partnership has numerous owners and splits up the responsibilities amongst these different owners. So there's no legal difference between the owner and the business itself. Sole proprietorship is cheaper to start, but of course it comes with less overhead, so compromises. And it also risks the owner's personal resources. Another video for the description. Now going into finding a lawyer, further diving into legal needs. So an option for businesses that are a legal entity is to converse with large startup law firms. And these type of firms do not make business owners pay up front, but they take a percentage of the actual company. So it's kind of like an investment for the law firm. If businesses do not want to work with large law firms, they can work with startup friendly firms. And an example of this is Atrium. And this is a corporate law firm that uses machine learning software in order to automate legal processes. Another option to find counsel is a colleague or friend recommendation. Now, talking about NDAs, IP, and other legal considerations. So, an NDA stands for a non disclosure agreement, and it's an agreement that prevents unauthorized disclosure of secrets. If one is assigning development work to an outside organization, then that organization should have signed an NDA. A venture capitalist provides startups with funds but receives a return investment, and their organization is most likely not going to sign an NDA. Um, a founder's agreement is a necessary legal step when there are multiple founders involved because it can outline the responsibilities of each founder. No template has to be used as a reference. It can be hard to publicate. There are often numerous negotiations, and it can be very time consuming to finish. Now, what is an intellectual property or an IP protection? So, this is a type of legal concept that provides legal protection for assets. The trademark is a type of IP protection which shields the product of a company from being copied. It patents guard an organization's product, and it gives the patent owner the right to prevent others from using, creating, or selling their patented product. Patents usually last several years. And now, for what copyright is, it guards original artistic work, and for most startups, copyright is the primary IP protection. Now, fundraising. So, fundraising is a full time job and should be taken very seriously. Venture capital firms invest in companies they believe in and in hope that they'll receive a large return. There are multiple investment types, and there are pre-seed, seed, Series A, and Series B. So for pre-seed or seed, it's an investment that occurs early on, even before the company shows that the product is actually going to work. Series A and Series B shows that funding that is used to help continue to scale the business. The pressure to deliver when a VC invests can be high, and it is likely that a business, even with their support, will be out of the business in only a few years. Some VCs are also going to work in pre seed or seed funding, and this funding typically occurs in the early stages of actual product development. Pre seed investments range from $50,000 to $250,000, and seed investments range from $250,000 to $1 million. In 12 to 18 months, a seed VC may want you to fundraise 2 times the amount given. And when fundraising the VCs, it's important to realize that it adds another person to answer to. Now, in case you don't want to use a VC, there are a few funding sources which are outside. Some of these include angel investors, non dilutive funding, crowdfunding, or accelerator programs. Angel investors are wealthy people who are looking to passively fund startups with capital in exchange for equity and convertible debt. They don't expect or want a 50 times return on the investment, but instead have a different motivation. They usually invest about 25 to $250,000, and for some angel investors, a 3 to 5 times return would be amazing. Non-dilutive funding. So non-dilutive funding is money that's incorporated in order to support the product without having to give up any equity. And examples include bank loans or university or federal grants. For crowdfunding, examples of this include Kickstarter and GoFundMe, and they may assist in providing early adopters, but they may be more difficult than seed rounds. And finally, for accelerator programs, these are group-based programs where entrepreneurs produce their ideas into reality. They select a tiny percentage of companies and help make those companies grow. They usually invest approximately $20,000 to $150,000, and they ask for about a 5 to 7% equity return investment. They offer mentoring, training, and feedback, and they usually last about 3 months. Now, talking about crafting a fundraising narrative. So, a fundraising narrative shows why one is spending money in the first place. It's not the same as a pitch deck, as it is much less thorough, but the primary questions still have to be answered, and this includes what are you created, what are you creating, what's the most captivating factor of your business, how much progress has been made, and what are you striving to achieve. The narrative for this should be short and sweet, and it should have the ability to informally discuss it with potential investors. It should also be quick so that it can be explained in 20 seconds or less. And the first 10 seconds should be who you are, what you're doing, and why it's important. The last 10 seconds should be progress, milestones, or long-term vision. So find the one persuasive reason as to why your company should receive investment, and a good narrative should have a strong financial plan in order to fully support its claim. And also, financial models are essentially inferences. Another video. And now for what makes a good pitch deck for day 5. Your pitch deck is basically your business card, and it's given to those who are in the best position to help you, such as investors and mentors. One of the first things that customers are going to see, and um, what they're going to see is going to leave a huge impression about your company as a whole. So key areas for a pitch deck are problem and solutions, business models, and the market. So basically the basis for your startup as a whole. Creating a deck includes starting with whatever is the most persuasive, keeping it incisive, and it's better to be concise than to make investors disinterested. Typically, you should have a length of 10 to 13 slides long if you're doing a slideshow. Well, it is a slideshow because it's a deck. And make sure that your deck answers the whys behind the investment, such as why is this a good opportunity? Why is your team the proper team to get it done? And why is this specific round of funding necessary? Now, talking about how to prospect your initial fundraising funnel. So, generate contention amongst investors. The 3-to-1 rule is important in order to generate the competition between these investors. You want to be in the final stages of negotiation with about 3 investors at the same time, and it's estimated to need about 10 meetings between investors in order to create a 3-to-1 situation. Some investor companies invest in numerous companies, while others only invest in a limited amount. Tools like Crunchbase and LinkedIn can help find investors if you can't find 20 or more to start with. Other entrepreneurs have VC companies that work with them, making it easy to get advice and how to approach them. Also, focus on people in the VC business and don't hyper focus on firms. Initiating the funnel. goal to spend about 10% of time creating relationships with potential investors and founders later on within the process. Relationships can make it easy and quick to find high level investments, and make sure that you negotiate and finalize with an investor before moving on and searching for a new group. Understand the different types of people who are working at VC firms, such as partners, venture partners, principals, and associates. Partners are generally the people who are making the most decisions. Venture partners are part time workers and look to source deals and make a couple investments. Principals are new to the business and just starting to make deals. And finally, associates can't make investments, but they can, however, help business owners navigate through the investment process. Attempt to have a mutual acquaintance that introduces you to the investor. Understanding the stages of growth. So there are two stages, and they all have different goals. Stage one is delivering a product. Can your team actually build something that consumers are willing to buy? Is the product ready to be sold on the market? After your first sale, you have to ask yourself if you can turn your few customers into a full base. The objective of this is to obtain a large amount of sales. Stage two is expansion. So survival is basically guaranteed at this point, and investors are guiding business to further success. The startup is now a more mature business and no longer considered as a beginner business. But you have to do your homework in order to have a chance of reaching state two, where you can, where survival is guaranteed at that point. Now for building a product roadmap. So this is a guide through the whole business process from making a product to making your first sale. You want to create your milestones throughout the map in order to help shareholders know where key important events are in a basic timeline. A/B testing helps to set apart two options when coming across how a certain variable must form. And the A and B test brings about the valuable results about which option is going to perform the best based on the particular parameter or goal. It helps to make decisions which are less biased, and an important decision when making a roadmap is deciding when to actually pivot. If your product development team starts heading in the wrong direction, a pivot to your roadmap can help things get back on track. If something isn't working, don't force it and cause more trouble. An example of this is how Instagram pivoted their idea from being a check-in product to a place to post personal pictures to share with the world. Then they stripped off any non-essential features in order to both save money and better fit the app. Also, consider product or channel fit. So, how effective is the product at having consumers find it publicly? Now, for pains that are common in startups, startups can cause long hours and be extremely demanding. There are ways to conduct business with greater results for your employees and your own product as well. Create and enforce strict limits on work hours. Throwing all energy into startup is not good. It's going to hurt your product and its effectiveness. Generate nourishment codes for all employees. Pay great amount of attention to the hiring process, especially the beginning. Employ people that can fix your company culture. Interviewing is also critical and not just important to consider if a candidate will contribute and not just be a non-negative. A good interview question would be to ask how the candidate has worked through a real life problem, so you know they're experienced. And at a startup with less than 100 employees, the CEO themselves should be making the hiring decisions. Culture. Culture is extremely important because it's the persona of your company, and it's a mixture of the following: work environment, the company mission, values, ethics, expectations, goals, etc. Think about having third party voices, giving a voice into the culture of your company, because this is going to be a possible benefit. Create a culture that can accommodate not just yours, but the community's strengths as a whole and weaknesses. Culture is not fully equal to perks. It's more difficult to generate than perks, and you need to find different ways to talk to employees in mass, especially as your company grows. Information is received differently by different people, mentally speaking, and multiple pass-throughs will have to be used in order to spread necessary information. A founder should personally interview at least 50 people for the first hires, develop effective interview questions, and make sure that the defining culture is not the end. That's the bibliography. These are the sources which we use. You might have to zoom in a little bit to see them, but these are the sources. Thank you, everyone, for watching today's live stream, and we will see you next week.